All right. My name is Lindsay, and I'm here to present today's class, Understanding Communication and Behavior Changes. And again, this is part of the dementia-friendly Prince George's Northern Sector. Thank you for inviting me to share this information with you. So I want to start off with, what is communication anyway? When we think about the word communication, what comes to mind for you? Probably first, it's talking and listening, but also communication is, it's everything that we do or say to convey a message or receive a message. So it's your facial expression, it's your body language, it's your eye contact, it's the tone of your voice. It's so many different pieces that come together to communicate a message to another person. And now let's say this person has dementia. Actually, the graph that you see on the screen, it's a bit outdated, but it gives us a starting point. This graph is all about how a normal, healthy adult understands one singular word. 7% of that message came from the words that were used, 38% came from the tone of voice, and 55% through their body language. Now, let's imagine this is someone living with dementia. That verbal piece of the pie is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And that person really has to rely on the tone of voice and the nonverbal signals, the body language, to understand that message. So as dementia progresses, we're focusing less and less on, exactly what is said, as in the words, and more on the body language and tone of voice. So in the early stage of the disease, you might notice some repetition. Your loved one asks you the same question over and over again, tells you the same story over and over again. You might notice some difficulty in processing information quickly and storing new information, including comprehending language and reading. Someone who was an avid reader might be starting to pull back from that. You might notice some difficulty in finding the right words. Maybe your loved one or your friend starts describing objects rather than calling them, by name. Maybe they start using some familiar words repeatedly, hand me that thing instead of hand me that fork. You might notice your loved one losing their train of thought pretty easily, getting distracted really easily. Maybe they're starting to struggle a bit with decision making or problem solving. And you might notice a bit of withdrawal from conversation. Generally in the early stage, that person is still pretty socially capable, but you might notice that they're not quite leading the discussion like maybe they used to. So a few strategies to consider in the early stage of the disease, and really for most of these are important throughout the entire length of this journey. We don't want to make assumptions about what that person wants or doesn't want, what they can do or not do. We don't want to argue, correct, or criticize. This is a big one. Try not to argue. If your loved one or your friend makes an incorrect statement, just let it roll off as much as you can, right? I know there are times when this is like a major safety thing, but a lot of the time things just come up in conversation. The story is being told wrong, some detail in the story is wrong. Just let it go. This is going to be so much easier for you and your stress level, and so much more kind to the person living with the disease. We don't want to quiz or test the person, right? It's really not going to be helpful to retain memories, to run through all of the kids or the grandkids' names, for example. It's probably going to be really frustrating for your loved one, and it gets really frustrating for you too, and there's really no benefit in the end. We don't want to interrupt someone when they're speaking or finish their sentences for them, even if it's taking them a bit longer to process information, to articulate their thoughts or their needs. We want to give them that time, especially in the early stage of the disease. Ask what they want. Do they want you to jump in and offer, a suggestion for the word, or do they want you to just kind of hang back and give them the time and space to come up with it on their own? I would say generally in the early stage, as a caregiver, I'm going to hang back a little bit. And most of the time, for the person who's struggling to come up with the word, they're going to give you a cue when they want your help. They're going to look to you, with those eyes. They're going to ask you, they're going to do something that lets you know that they're ready for your help. And we don't want to ask questions that rely on memory. You know, there's really like almost never a good time to say, don't you remember? Don't you remember? We just talked about that this morning. Don't you remember we have to go in a few minutes? You know, don't you remember you already had breakfast? Find different ways to communicate. You know, that don't you remember, just take that out of your vocabulary entirely. Some of the strategies in the early stage, we want to continue to include that person in conversation with others, you know, be intentional about drawing that person into the conversation, not like putting them on the spot, but by saying things that include them. You know, we had a delicious lunch over at so-and-so's house the other day, didn't we? Oh, I know how much you love that apple pie, whatever it is, including them in that conversation, speaking directly to the person, not talking about them in front of them like they're not there. We want to keep our sentences clear and straightforward, and just take a little pause between sentences. I know when I'm talking with you on this webinar, I talk pretty fast. I've got a lot I'm trying to cover tonight. But when you're talking with your friend or your loved one, just taking that little pause between each sentence can be really powerful. Just like that. Just gives a couple extra seconds for your friend or your loved one to process what you said and get their 2 cents in. We want to use the same words if we're repeating ourselves. You know, a lot of communication, a lot of the things I talk about, I think are just kind of like common sense, like we should all do that for other people. I would say this repeating the same words is one of the things that I think is sort of different than what we do in normal everyday life. So if you are asking your loved one to do something or asking them to make a decision and they're not responding, number one, we want to give plenty of time. They might just need more time to process. But if you are going to repeat, if they ask you, you know, what did you say again? Repeat it exactly the same way that you said it the first time. Don't try to explain it in some roundabout way, just repeat. We want to use a lot of visual cues in our communication. Right? So we might do a little more kind of pointing at the thing that we're talking to. You know, if we're going to say hi, we're going to add a little wave to it. We're going to include a little more in the way we communicate. We want to try minimizing distractions. Remember I said in the early stage, people do start getting distracted fairly easily. So minimize that, you know, turn that TV off if you're trying to sit down and talk together or have a meal together. Turn the radio off, you know, close the door, do something to eliminate distractions if you can. You want to use good timing. This is, again, one of those things that's like, we should just always do this with other people. Use good timing. You know, you probably know your friend or your loved one, and you know when they're in a good mood, when they're in a bad mood, when they didn't sleep well. You know, use good timing. If you're about to ask a question that's a bit complex, or you're about to bring up a topic that's a little sensitive, try to make sure that the scenario is as conducive to this conversation as possible. If they're really great in the morning, very energetic, processes information well, but later in the day, a little more confused, disoriented, don't wait and have those important conversations late in the day. Do it in the morning. You know, go see the doctor in the morning. Have maybe breakfast or lunch with friends in the morning if that's the good time of day. And then use that person's preferred method of communication. You may find that for someone who maybe before was really good with phone conversation, that's starting to struggle a little bit. Maybe face-to-face is a little better. Or, you know, maybe before where you might have said, okay, I'm coming to pick you up tomorrow at noon. Maybe now you also write a note about that. Into the middle stage of the disease, there are additional changes, right? This is, I know I'm breaking it down into early, middle, and late stage, but this is really a continuum. And your friend or your loved one, you might recognize that they're having changes from a different stage than what I'm labeling it. That's okay. Everyone is different. Different diseases are going to affect the brain differently. So just think more about the changes and the symptoms and the strategies and less about the labels if that throws you off. So in the middle stage, generally we start to see that that ability to understand other people is more significantly declining. I mean, at least to a much more noticeable extent if you are that other person. You might notice your loved one's ability to find the right words and put full sentences together is starting to decline. You know, much more difficulty maybe with thinking of someone's name or labeling an object. And you might notice your loved one then talking a little bit more in like phrases, responding to questions that you're asking, but really not putting quite as much content together. They might start to use invented words or use familiar words repeatedly. So I use my own grandmother as an example. She had 4 daughters. The oldest daughter's name was Kay. If she was talking about any of the 4 daughters, she would frequently call them Kay. She knew that they were different people, but Kay was just the name that would come out first. She just couldn't help it, right? So someone might just use those familiar words repeatedly. You might notice for some people use some kind of word salad, I call it. So all these words get kind of jumbled together into a sentence that doesn't necessarily make sense. Some of the words make sense, but some of them just don't. You might notice that person speaking less frequently. Maybe not really initiating conversation any longer, but still responding if you ask the question, right? If you give that prompt. You might notice confabulation, and I find that this is a word that not everyone is familiar with. Confabulation to the untrained eye, let's say, looks like a lie. My husband, I told my husband he needed to go take a shower, and he told me that he already did. But I know that he didn't because the shower floor is dry, there's no wet towel, he's still dirty. It looks like a lie, but for the person living with dementia, there's no intent behind it. There's no intentional lying. It's just that that person is filling in the gaps with what makes the most sense to them. If I've showered every morning of my adult life, what would make today any different? So I'm going to tell you that I showered because that's just what I always do. So there's no intentional lying here, but it's that person just filling in the gaps with what makes the most sense, even if they seem very convinced of something that's not actually true. And in the middle stage, that person's ability to make their needs known is declining, and they're probably increasingly communicating through their behavior. So what I mean by all of this is, maybe if I'm in the middle stage of dementia, like Alzheimer's disease, I might not be able to tell you that I have to go to the bathroom. You might see me get up and down from the chair. You might see me walking around. You might see me, maybe my behavior changes in some way, but I may not be able to articulate to you that I have to go to the bathroom, or that I'm hungry or thirsty, or that I'm experiencing pain, or that I'm scared or worried or bored. You're going to see this in their behavior, right? Something is going to change. So for example, if I'm in pain and you're trying to help me get dressed, maybe I'm not telling you that that hurts, but what I'm doing instead is yelling, or that I'm pushing you away, right? That behavior is communicating a message. We're going to come back to that in a little while. So next, this is something that I really want you to think about in the middle stage. I mean, even the early stage, like these are good things to do, but especially into the middle stage, this is going to be really helpful. How do you physically approach someone? We want to remember the basic 6 steps. So the first step is to always approach from the front and stay in that person's visual field. Don't sneak up from the back. Don't walk over to me from my side. Come from the front and make sure you stay right there. What happens with dementia is it's not that the eyes are changing, but the brain's ability to process all this information that your eyes bring in is starting to change. And the brain has to prioritize. What do I need to know the most? That's right in front of me. So peripheral vision is not helpful any longer. It's really not relevant. So like for me, at my age, without dementia, I can see like way out to here. If I had dementia, I might see this much, like scuba goggles. Or as it progresses, I might see this much, like binoculars, right? So if you come up to me from the side, I don't even know that you're there until you get way over here. So really coming from the front is important. And if you have to make, put in a few extra steps to get around that way, let's say they're sitting at a table, do it. Take that extra time. Number 2, establish eye contact. So before you even say anything, make eye contact with the person you are approaching. Number 3, call them by their preferred name and identify yourself. So first, what is their preferred name? Maybe this is your family member and you know exactly what their preferred name is. Maybe it's, let's say it's Jack. Don't call me John, don't call me, call me Jack. Maybe it's Reverend Jack. Maybe it's Doctor. Maybe there's a nickname, hey buddy. Maybe you are the adult child and this is mom or this is dad. But when you're saying mom or dad, if that seems to cause some confusion, if that causes any like irritability or frustration, you might pull back from using mom and dad. You might start using what the rest of the world would call that person. Maybe it's Jack. So use their preferred name and then identify yourself. So even if this is someone who, you know pretty well, let's say it's a good friend you've known for years and years, let them off the hook. They may know that there's a relationship there, but in the moment may not be able to process that quickly what your name is. So like when I would go and visit my grandmother, I'd come from the front and I'd say, oh, hi grandma, so nice to see you. It's Lindsey, I'm here to visit. All right, I would say your granddaughter, Lindsey. Sorry, I left that part out. My grandmother had 30-some grandchildren, right? So for her to be able to come up with my name, right on the spot, of course, I'd be waking her up from a nap, right? As I approach her, I would tell her what my name is, let her off the hook. All right, then you get to eye level. So now I've approached, you sort of take your time with that. Don't just rush up on somebody. But now you've approached. It's really uncomfortable. Probably your loved one, if they have dementia in the middle stage, they're probably seated, right, in a chair, possibly in a wheelchair. I mean, it's possible that they're standing, but let's imagine they're seated. But you're standing, right? You just came up to them. It's really uncomfortable for that person to sit there and talk to you like this. Not to mention that there's just sort of a power imbalance going on there. So get down to eye level. Pull up a chair, if you can, maybe you kneel down on the ground if it's just for a few seconds. I know that gets harder as I'm getting older, but get down to eye level. Number 5 is let them initiate touch, but you have to put the signal out there, right? So if I'm going to come up to you and I'm going to say hello, I'm going to say, hi, it's Lindsey. I'm going to put my hand up here by my face, right? Because remember, we're making eye contact. This is where they're looking, I hope. So I'm going to say hi, and then let's say I want to put out my hand for a handshake. I go from here and put my hand down for a handshake. Or maybe I'm going to put my hand out for you to take it. We're going to hold hands. We're going to walk somewhere together. I put that cue out, but I let you decide to take my hand. I don't just grab your hand from your lap and say, let's go, right? I put the cue out, but you decide if you're going to take it. And then step number 6, give directions one step at a time. Don't give a whole laundry list of things to do or a whole laundry list of questions. One step at a time. So let's say we need to, put on our shoes, get up, go somewhere. It's not like, okay, put on your shoes, let's go. Putting on your shoes might mean, first it's grabbing one shoe, maybe it's, slipping your foot in, then we need to tie it, right? Then it's put the other foot out. It's one thing at a time. So in the middle stage, some of the strategies to think about, one-on-one conversation is going to start working a lot better than being in a big group of people. So think about this for, I know right now we're all kind of off in our own corners in our own homes during this pandemic, but eventually you're going to have a family barbecue again, right? Or you're going to have a family birthday party or a holiday. And you may find that it is overwhelming for your loved one to have any real conversation in a big group of people. One-on-one or small group, but with only one person at a time talking is going to work a whole lot better. You want to find a quiet space with minimal distractions. Right? So again, maybe it's turn off the TV, or if your loved one lives in an assisted living or in a nursing home, maybe sitting in the dining room where there's so much hustle and bustle and talking and, things going on, maybe that's not the best place to have that visit, but maybe you can find a little quiet corner somewhere. You want to speak slowly and clearly and use shorter sentences and more basic vocabulary. So I'm not saying like draw out your words in some really abnormal kind of way, but just slowing down your pace a little bit, being very clear with what you say, shorter sentences, basic vocabulary. If you're going to ask questions, maybe you're trying to make some conversation or there's some choices to be made, ask one question at a time. It's not, oh, hi, Grandma, how are you today? How are you feeling? Isn't the weather beautiful? What's new? Oh, way too much. One question at a time. Or if you're giving directions, it's not, put on your shoes, stand up, let's go, we gotta run. One thing at a time. If that person is to make a choice, in the middle stage, you're probably finding that it's a lot harder for them to make an open-ended choice. What would you like for dinner tonight? Give two options. Maybe you're going out to eat and you look at the menu and you say, oh, I see that they have, this great salmon or they have burgers, right? Pick two things that your loved one really likes and then let them choose. Or if that's even too difficult, if you hear things like, oh, whatever you're having, oh, that sounds good, I'll have what you're having. It means that they're having a hard time making a choice, unless they've always been that way. Maybe you give a yes/no question, oh, I was thinking a burger might sound really good tonight. Does that sound good to you? Yes or no? If your loved one is having more of that word salad, kind of the sentences aren't always making sense, it sounds, there's some words that you identify, but it also kind of sounds like some mumbo jumbo, look for key words or patterns. If we really are patient and we really focus and we pay attention, you can usually pick up some keywords in what your loved one is saying. Are they asking about going somewhere? Are they saying something about father? Are they, what might they be talking about? Really listen closely. You want to use familiar language. So here's my example of that. When we talk about going to the bathroom, there are so many different words that we use for bathroom. Do you have to go to the bathroom now? Maybe you say restroom, maybe you say toilet, maybe you say the John or the loo or the Biffy or the, I won't even go into all the words that I've heard over the years. So think about what are the familiar words to my loved one. So for example, if I'm going to suggest that they stop and use the bathroom before we leave, do I say bathroom? Do I say toilet? Do I say take a piss? What is it that makes sense to your loved one? Use those words. You want to give a lot of visual cues, especially into the middle stage, whether it's kind of with your talking, a lot of visual cues, come on, let's go, right? Or you're going to say hi, you're going to put up your hand, put your hand out for a handshake. Or maybe it's even visual cues around your house. Maybe you put a big picture of a toilet on the bathroom door, not the word toilet. Maybe the early stage, the word toilet would do the job. In the middle stage, put a big picture of the toilet on the door. Or even better, leave the door open with the light on. So when your loved one is scanning the room for where to go when they have to go to the bathroom, they see the toilet, they have much more chance of success in finding it independently. In the middle stage, you want to offer a guess or fill in the words if your loved one is having some difficulty word finding. I know in the early stage I said, kind of hang back or ask them what they want. Now into the middle stage, you find that you really have to kind of step in a little more often. If you think the word that your loved one is trying to say, give them a moment, but if they really are seeming stuck, offer that word, offer at least what you think they're talking about. And then turn negatives into positives. You might find into the middle stage, you're having to, in some way, say no, right? You can't go there, don't do that, don't stand up, don't go there, your doctor doesn't want you to. But how does it feel to be told don't, can't, you shouldn't? Doesn't feel good at all, right? We're already, for the person living with dementia, they're already in a place in their life where there's that feeling of maybe lack of confidence, people are taking away my independence, lack of control, low self-esteem. So try to think about how can we flip those things around into something more positive. So, can I help you with that? I'd love to walk together instead of don't go alone, right? Or can you wait with me for a moment? Find some positive way to communicate what you need rather than saying, these kind of negative terms like don't. In the middle stage, we want to involve that person in our conversation still, but we're going to need to give them extra time to process what we say and to respond. It might take up to 90 seconds for your loved one to respond, especially as we get into the late stage of the disease, or with certain types of dementia like Lewy body dementia. It might take quite a long time for that response. And that might feel awkward to you, but give it a try. You know, you have to kind of try to determine, is it that my loved one didn't hear me? Did they not understand me? Or do they just need more time to process and respond? So that takes some trial and error, you know, and really knowing the person to kind of pick up on the cues from them. In the middle stage, we want to join that person's reality. So their reality might not match yours. Just today, I was communicating with a family where this gentleman doesn't recognize his wife. He's asking to go and see his wife in the town that they used to live in years ago. He thinks his wife is his mother. That is his reality, right? All of these short-term memories, all the things from the last, I don't know, maybe a few decades are really not available to him now. He thinks that he needs to do something. He thinks that she is someone that she's not. So rather than correct him, because it's not going to work to correct him, right? You're not going to convince someone living with dementia. You might eventually wear them down, but then they're in a bad mood, you're in a bad mood. Was that really worth it? Join their reality, right? If he wants to call me mom, it might feel hurtful. I don't deny that. It might be awkward, but how can I, as that care partner, be the one who changes my response? Instead of saying, I'm not your mother. Your mother's been gone for 20 years. Just going with the flow. Mom, you know, can you bring me a sandwich? Just going on ahead with it, not saying anything about the mom part, just go with the flow. So that's just an example. We're going to come back to joining that person's reality. We want to watch your loved one's nonverbal signals and their behavior. So in the middle stage, again, less able to tell you what they need or with how they feel, but looking for those nonverbal signals. You know, are they sleepy? Are their brows furrowed? Are they grimacing? Are they hitting out? Are they yelling? Are they pacing? You know, looking for those kinds of signals. You become a detective, you know, you're gathering all of these clues and then you're trying to piece together what this means. In the middle stage, we want to make sure that we're validating and responding to emotions. So let's use this example of the man who thinks his wife is his mother and wants to go and see his wife somewhere else. If this wife had said, your mother died 20 years ago, don't you remember? How do you think he's going to feel? Not good at all. So rather, maybe we validate him. You know, it sounds like you really miss your mom, or it sounds like you really want to go and see your wife. You miss her terribly. Validating how they feel, responding to the emotion rather than responding to the facts of the case, you know. Let the person know you're listening, both verbally and with your body language. So verbally, even if you're struggling to understand what this person is saying, adding in those little things like, oh, really? Tell me more. Tell me about that, right? Adding those things, and then with your body language, that I'm paying attention to you. I'm not looking at my phone. I'm not looking and talking to somebody over there. I'm with you. And then in the middle stage, you're going to find that, you know, conversation does become more challenging. So rather, you might start spending time doing things together rather than just talking together. So when I would go visit my grandmother, she was in a wheelchair due to some other health conditions, and we would go for a wheelchair ride around her nursing home, right? We'd go and say hi to the nurses, we'd stop and chat with the other residents, we'd go and visit the fish tank, we'd go sit outside on the patio for a little while. We would find something to do together. And maybe with your loved one, it's playing a very simple card game together, listening to music together, you know, finding something that you can do together, maybe rearranging flowers, but maybe relying a bit less on the actual conversation. So late stage, you know, by the late stage of the disease, you know, both kind of physically, a lot of things have changed, and cognitively and with communication. So generally, vocabulary is reduced to maybe just a few words or sounds. This person is usually much more passive, probably sleeping a lot. Maybe you find their head drooped forward. If their first language was not English, not their current language, shall I say, you are going to probably find that in the late stage of the disease, they are reverting back to their first language. Even towards kind of the middle stage, latter part of the middle stage, this starts to happen, but especially into the late stage. If if the first language I learned as a child was Spanish, and then maybe sometime in elementary school or high school as a young adult, I learned English, by the late stage of this disease, I'm probably back to speaking Spanish again. But I also want to point out, even for people who are not reverting back to a different language, communication is impaired. So even if I have reverted back to Spanish, maybe you speak Spanish, but it doesn't mean that what I'm saying in Spanish makes a whole lot of sense anymore. I might still have word finding difficulties, or difficulties expressing myself even in another language. And in the late stage, you might find that that person does still respond to familiar words, to familiar phrases or songs or prayers. Music can be really, really powerful. Someone who couldn't answer a basic question like, what's your name, might be able to sing a favorite song that they've been singing since they were a child, or even playing the piano, or saying a very familiar prayer. So these are great ways to connect with each other. So strategies, again, a quiet environment, being, even more mindful of getting that person's attention. If they've got their eyes closed, drooped forward, thinking about, rubbing someone on the arm or on the shoulder or stroking their hair, or even maybe rubbing their chest. I'm just gonna fix my slides here. Again, connecting with favorite music, favorite sayings, familiar prayers. Touch is going to be really powerful. For all of us, touch is really meaningful, but especially in the middle and especially late stage of the disease where you really can't rely on verbal communication much, use touch. Hold hands, give hugs, give a kiss on the cheek or the forehead, or give a massage. These are the kinds of things that we can do to really connect. Continue to talk. Even if your loved one isn't talking back with you, there's no back and forth conversation, the familiar, soothing sound of your voice can be really comforting. If this person is sort of calling out with something repetitive, help me, or something like that, it might be difficult to determine if there's really help needed, or if that's just like the phrase that just keeps coming out. I mean, obviously something is needed, and you're going to try to figure out what that is. But you might also think of a simple statement that provides reassurance. I'm here with you. You're safe here. I love you. Something like that. You want to really be present. You want to engage the senses. So again, rather than relying on conversation, thinking about touching things that have a very particular feel to them, or using different kinds of smells to maybe stimulate appetite, or playing some really favorite music, or holding hands. And then watching for those nonverbal signs of pain or discomfort. In the middle stage, it gets iffy about if someone can communicate that to you. By the late stage, they're not able to tell you that their back hurts, or they have a headache, or they're hungry, or that they're constipated. So you have to be the one to watch for those things. General communication tips, I'm just going to pick a couple out in here. Being patient. Being patient is really, really helpful. It's a skill that a lot of us have to practice and be really intentional about, but it's going to be so helpful for you. And I'm going to pick out also Q-tip, quit taking it personally. If your loved one accuses you of something, if they don't remember something, if, things will happen that might be frustrating or hurtful from time to time, and really remembering that this is a disease affecting my loved one's brain and they can't help it. Really trying not to take those things personally. Use a lot of humor, use a lot of love. Reminiscing is a great way to connect with each other when having kind of normal social chit-chat conversation starts to get tricky. But now I want to pivot into the behavioral change. There are some common behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia. Your loved one or your friend, might experience some of these, they might not. It varies from one person to another and from one disease to another. But you might notice mood swings, some suspicion or jealousy or paranoia. Maybe it's hoarding, rummaging, pacing the room. You might notice socially inappropriate behavior, so saying or doing things that that person normally would not have done. You might notice that person avoiding situations where failure occurs. Maybe I don't want to go into the bathroom because every time I go in there, it's never pleasant. I always feel like I don't know what to do, or I feel like I'm being yelled at, or I'm scared, so I'm going to avoid it. You might notice some agitation or some aggression, which could be verbal or it could be physical. You might notice delusions, which are false beliefs, right? If I think that Elvis came to see me yesterday and he didn't, it's a delusion. Hallucination is if I really think I see or hear or feel something that's not there. If I think that Elvis is sitting right next to me during this presentation, or that somebody is playing Elvis music in the background, that would be a hallucination. Repetition, you probably are experiencing some repetition, especially if your loved one is experiencing Alzheimer's disease. And then sundowning. So sundowning, basically what I mean by that is later on in the day, like into like the late afternoon, into the evening, your loved one's behavior might change. They're getting tired. It's a long day. Their brain has been working so hard all day long, right? They're tired. They're not thinking clearly. Maybe they're more confused. Behavior changes. The light changes outside. Maybe there's a lot of commotion late in the day. Family or staff coming and going. So sundowning, just things get really hard later in the day. But I want to remind you, or let you know if you're new to this, the person living with dementia is not deliberately trying to be difficult. These are behavioral symptoms that are a product of a disease that's affecting their brain. So we want to look for the strengths of the person. I want to reiterate here, the brain is physically changing. It's shrinking. Brain cells are dying. So when things are happening, it is not your loved one doing it on purpose. They're doing the best they can with what they've got. So we want to look for the strengths. What can my loved one do? What makes them happy? How can they connect? What are the abilities? So when there's a behavior change, there's a cognitive impairment. So that's not to be denied, but usually there's something else going on too. Cognitive impairment is there every day, but why is today so much harder? There's something else that's triggering. It could be environmental, it's too noisy in here, it's too cold in here. It might be physical, I'm in pain, or I'm really hungry, I'm thirsty. It could be psychological, like I'm bored, or I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling sad. It could be sensory, which might be an impairment, like maybe I already have hearing deficit or vision problems, or it could be misinterpretation, right? I might see something and my brain isn't processing that correctly, or I hear a noise and it startles me, right? I'm not coping with those things in the same way. Could be a psychiatric illness, could be depression, delirium, which is sort of like a sudden type of confusion. It could be a change in health status or in medications. So maybe my blood sugar has shot up or has dropped, or you've added a new medication and it's a side effect. Maybe the behavior change is a cognitive impairment plus a change in the routine. I know a lot of the families that I work with are really, really experiencing this over the last couple of months. We've had a huge change in routine. Whatever your routine used to be, maybe your loved one's in an assisted living and you come and see them every day, that's not happening. Or you live at home, your loved one goes to a day program a few days a week. That's not happening, right? There is a huge change and that can trigger some behavior change. Or it could be the staff or family member's approach. Even as professionals, we make mistakes. Even as family caregivers who and you love your loved one probably more than anybody else. You're trying your best, but you make mistakes too. We all do. So sometimes the behavior change is because we made a mistake, right? Maybe I didn't communicate something in a way that works for you. I just asked you to do 4 different things. I had maybe a kind of a tense tone of voice. I was a little bit sharp with what I said, and maybe that's why we have this behavior change. So when you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. And unfortunately, there's no one-size-fits-all solution to the challenging situations that you might face. I wish I could say, oh, your loved one is doing this, we'll just say that. But that's not how it works. Every day is different, diseases progress, skill sets are different, personalities are different. So you really do become that detective. You got to put on your detective hat, pick up all the clues you can. So behavior is communication. We mentioned this a little while ago. Our job as these detectives is to figure out the meaning. Why do I think they did that? Why could he be getting up and walking around the house every day around this time? Or what are they trying to say? I'm really having a hard time understanding what he or she wants or what they need. What do I think they're trying to say? What are the clues that I have available? Some of the things we want to consider would be the context of one's life experience. So if I keep getting up and following you around, let's say following one of the nurses around in an assisted living or a nursing home, but my career was as a nurse, that would be normal, right? To be up, to be checking on people. Maybe you've got your clipboard, you've got, certain things there with you. Also, you want to think about the context of the current reality. What do they, if we were in their shoes, what would we be seeing or feeling? How would we make sense of that? What must this look like to them? And we want to look for the emotions behind the behavior and validate those emotions, right? So if it seems like you're really frustrated with me, validating that I see that I've really upset you. I see that I've really frustrated you and I'm really sorry, right? It doesn't mean that you necessarily did something wrong. It's not that there's a winner and a loser here. It's just, I see that you're frustrated with me for one reason or another. I want to validate that, I want to apologize. So if there is behavior change, so thinking about the pacing or the hoarding or the repetition or the mood swings or any of those other things we were commenting on, we want to ask ourselves the 6 W's. And those are, what is happening? Like what's happening that I'm concerned about? Like not a big package of things, not like, oh, it was such a hard day, it was a terrible day. Well, what specifically happened that I'm concerned about? Number 2, why is the behavior happening? Why do I think it might be happening? Right? Is there hunger? Is there thirst? Are they scared? Is the routine off? Was it my approach? Why do I think it's going on? Who is involved? Trying to identify a pattern. Is it just with me? Is it with everyone? Is it with people that are familiar? People who are unfamiliar? Certain staff members? Certain grandchildren? Looking for patterns. Where does the behavior usually happen? Oh, it usually happens in the bathroom, or it usually happens in the bedroom, or it usually happens when we go outside of our home. Again, looking for a pattern here. When does the behavior usually happen? Oh, maybe later on in the afternoon, around 4 or 5 o'clock, things get really hard. Well, maybe it's about 1 in the morning, he goes to bed around 10, always wakes up around 1, really, really confused, thinking it's time to get up and go to work, right? Looking for patterns on when it happens. And then probably the point you wished you could just rush right to, but you can't, is what do we do next? What do we do about this, right? But we have to work through all of these clues before we can really get to what do we do next. We do want to consider, is this a behavior that we need to change? Is it something that's hurting someone? Or is it just kind of annoying? Maybe as that care partner, if I get asked that same question again, I'm just gonna lose it, right? But if my loved one isn't bothered by it, they're not frustrated in asking me this question over and over again, do I really need to change this, or do I just need to figure out how I can cope, how I can handle this without necessarily changing that behavior? Can I ignore it? Do I reinforce or support the behavior? So as the example of the person in the assisted living who used to be a nurse and now wants to go around and help everybody, who wants to follow the nurses around, can we somehow reinforce or support the behavior, right? It's not necessarily an unhealthy behavior to be up and to be active and to be social. So how can I reinforce that? Can I give you a clipboard? Can I give you a job to do? Can I ask you to sit and read next to this other resident, right? Finding some way to support that. Or do I need to redirect the behavior and help that person re-engage in something else? Maybe this is kind of a dangerous behavior. Maybe it's affecting other people in a way that's just, for one reason or another, it's not gonna work. It's not acceptable. We want to think before we redirect the person, try to re-engage them, what is their personality? What are some of their favorite things? If someone is already escalated up to here, they have had it with you. You're trying to get them in the shower and they're screaming and there's all kinds of stuff going on. You're not just going to probably be able to say like, here, have a cookie. Like, let's try to prevent the escalation from happening rather than trying to bring it down. And we have to know something about that person. If I'm not a sweets person and you try and bribe me with a cookie, it's going to be totally unsuccessful. So we want to know the person well. And this is really going to be key to preventing these difficult behaviors. What were their habits throughout their lifetime, at home, recently? What are their routines? Like when did they shower or did they take a bath? Was it the morning? Was it the evening? What were their preferences? What are their current preferences? What do they like to drink? How do they take their coffee? What kind of music do I like? What are their pet peeves? What is it that's going to rub him or her the wrong way? If my name is Jack, maybe I don't like it when you say, hi, Jack, because it sounds like, hi, Jack. Hello, Jack works so much better, right? What are those pet peeves so that we can avoid those pitfalls? What are the lifelong activities that I've been interested in? Maybe I love working in my yard, I love my garden, my flowers, or I've always been someone who, I like to make music, I like to sing music. What are those lifelong activities we can tap into? And then what are those surefire smile makers? What's that thing that's just always going to make him or her smile? Maybe it's paying a compliment, you have the best sense of style, or you have such a beautiful singing voice. Or maybe it's cracking a joke, or maybe it is bringing over that cup of coffee and that chocolate chip cookie. What is that thing that, like, maybe not every time, but most of the time is going to be helpful? So joining their world. When you have a friend or a loved one whose reality is different than yours, they're in a different place and time in their mind, you're not going to be able to bring them back to our reality, right? One of the things you can do is reminisce with that person, to talk about things that they do have the memories that they can access. Talk about childhood, teenage years, maybe young adult years. What were those happy memories? What were the things you can laugh about? I know with my other grandmother, we always really I liked reminiscing with her about where she grew up. She grew up on a farm, and I would ask her questions about that. And even if it was things that I had asked her before, I knew the answers, I would still ask because she loved to talk about it so much. When we're joining someone's world, we're also doing with them, we're not doing for them, right? So if my loved one is having some difficulty getting themselves dressed in the morning, it doesn't mean that I need to come up and actually undress and dress you. It might mean that we do something together, right? If I'm standing next to you, you might be able to take your shirt off and I can hand you the next one. Or if I helped you get the arms and the head and everything in the right place, you can pull it down. Finding ways that we can work together, not me doing it for you. We want to participate in meaningful and failure-free activities together. So it's not just about kind of like passing the time and busy work, but what would really be meaningful? What, again, knowing the person, their history, their preferences, activities, knowing those things help us create those meaningful activities and design them in such a way, at such a level that they're failure-free. I'm not saying like so simple that it seems like, child's work, but I'm saying that that person isn't going to be so frustrated about it. So let's say if I was a homemaker, I want to help around the house, but I can't actually like do the dishes and go through all the steps to do that properly. But maybe if you're doing the dishes, I can rinse them. Or if you bring over the silverware with this little silverware caddy thing, I can organize them. And let's say I get the spoons and the forks all mixed together. Does it matter? No, don't say a single word about it. Just say, thank you so much for your help. I really appreciate it. Later on, you can reorganize. Okay, joining their world, we also want to avoid arguing, correcting, or criticizing. Like I was just saying, they get the spoons and the forks mixed up or whatever the case might be. Don't criticize it. Don't say, oh my goodness, everything is in the wrong spot. Let me help you with this. Just thank that person, move on. We want to use simple explanations. So let's say your loved one is looking for someone who's not here. rather than going into some lengthy story about where they are, where they're going, what time they're coming. Just give a really simple explanation. You know, he's on his way home from work, he'll be here soon. And to tell the truth or not tell the truth. So, for example, if I'm calling you mother and you're not my mother died years and years ago, do I say to you, well, your mother died? I would not do that. If you think that I'm mother, obviously there's some kind of a disconnect going on here. Now, if you're asking for your mother and, you know, maybe early stage disease, we can maybe talk about, you know, where do you think mother is? And there may be some recollection, you know, well, she passed away, didn't she? And just wanting confirmation of that. But there are times when you're going to have to just kind of talk in the gray area, right? You're not outright lying, but you're not wanting to confirm something either. Just talking in the gray area. So if you're looking for mother, rather than saying, well, mother's getting her hair done, which would be a total outright lie, or, well, mother died 20 years ago, which is total truth, maybe I talk in the gray area. We talk about mother. Oh, mother was so beautiful, wasn't she? Oh my goodness, I just remember, you know, how she'd make those cinnamon rolls on Saturday morning and the house would smell so good, right? You find whatever that thing is that the person is asking about, it's obviously important to them, it's on their mind, but you're kind of talking, you're taking that conversation in a different direction. So thinking about distraction or redirection, these are some of my kind of go-to categories. One would be, what's this person's favorite snack or drink? You know, maybe it's that cup of coffee, maybe it's a piece of chocolate for a lot of people. Maybe it's conversation and reminiscing. You know, maybe if this person is like doing something that's just not working for right now. It's not something you want them to be doing. It's destructive in some way or it's unsafe. It may just be that if we sat down together and we started chatting for a while, that's the distraction that's needed. And especially if we can reminisce about some favorite topics from long ago. Exercise is really good for utilizing some energy. So for example, getting up and going for a walk together can be really helpful to prevent some of these challenging behavior changes. It might be a hands-on activity that's helpful, you know, just kind of like that act of holding the newspaper, even if it's upside down, doesn't matter. If they're happy with it, we're happy with it. Or putting together a jigsaw puzzle or sorting, you know, sorting silverware, doing an art project, doing a game together. Maybe it's favorite music that can be that distraction or redirection. You know, if I start singing a favorite song, you start singing it along with me, we're both in a good mood, and maybe I can actually help you with that whole shower and you hardly even realize what's going on because you are so into this song and this moment together. And if your loved one is resisting care, it may be that they're reacting to a perceived threat, right? What's she going to do to me? I don't know what's going on. Maybe with the mirror, I think there are more people in the bathroom than are actually here. We want to try working around their schedule. So for example, if bathing is a challenge, thinking about, well, when's a good time for them? What's part of their routine? When are they, you know, kind of in the best mood or the most capable of participating? We want to tell them what we're going to do right before we do it. So I'm not saying tell somebody in the morning that they're having a shower tonight, but I'm saying like right before I do something. If I'm going to help you unbutton your pants, I'm going to tell you before I reach for your pants. We're going to give one step at a time directions, you know, taking it easy, taking it slow, being patient. We want to use mirroring. So if I want, so let's use hand washing. Everyone's working on hand washing right now, right? Instead of saying, well, go in there and wash your hands, maybe we go in and I wash my hands too. And when you watch what I'm doing, you start doing it too. Or maybe we're able to even kind of scrub some hands together. Playing favorite music before a task that might be challenging could be really helpful to kind of get that mood in a better place, or playing favorite music during that personal care activity. Maybe things are just not going well. You see that it's escalating. This is not going in a good direction. We stop. Try again later. You know, is it really imperative that we brush our teeth right now? Or could it be later? Or what if we don't even do it till tonight? Fine. And then if there's incontinence, you might consider a toileting schedule, and rather than waiting for your loved one to say they have to go to the bathroom, maybe every couple of hours, you know, you make a point to suggest and initiate that. Maybe it's utilizing a colored toilet seat instead of a white toilet seat. Get one of those kind of wood ones or get a black one, something that they can see. And if there's kind of incontinence in that someone is relieving themselves in like plants or trash cans, maybe we can remove those from the environment. So I see we're short on time. I talk so much. So disinhibited behaviors, when somebody is saying or doing something like, let's say, making sexual comments or racial slurs or swear words, it can be one of those things that just as a caregiver, it just kind of sets you off. It's like just such a shock. You're just reacting. Rather, try to really stay present, stay in the moment, take a deep breath, count to 10, right? Give yourself a little bit of time before you react. We want to validate the feelings of that person. So let's say I'm saying some very unpleasant things to someone else. Rather than criticizing, oh, Mom, you can't say that. Don't use those words. That's inappropriate. Maybe we can validate, I see that you're really frustrated right now, Mom, or you seem really uncomfortable right now. We might be able to provide a really brief or simple explanation, like, for example, if someone is making a sexual advance towards someone that's just not appropriate, like let's say someone helping with personal care, I'm already married, I can't, or, we can't do that. Finding some just very simple thing that you can say. You might redirect to a more positive activity if there are these disinhibited types of behaviors. You might just give it some time, right? It's just maybe a bad day, it's a bad moment. We just got to ride the wave and let it end. And talk with other caregivers, because these are really challenging situations and you might feel like you are just totally alone in this. I have no idea what to do. I've never known this happening to anybody else. Start talking to other caregivers and you'll find that you are definitely not alone. So I want you to remember, the person with dementia can't change their behavior. We have to be the ones that change our response to the situation. And so this series is part of dementia-friendly Prince George's County Northern Sector, which is one of the Dementia-Friendly America initiatives. You can find a lot more information about Dementia-Friendly America online. Dementia-Friendly Prince George's Northern Sector has a couple of virtual support groups that you can join. Highly encourage this for family caregivers. There is even a social distancing support group. There's a monthly email newsletter to sign up for, get some updates, some resources. We do have one more session in this 4-part webinar series, which will be next Thursday evening, the 28th at 7 p.m., all about person-centered care at home. So a lot more on kind of those engagement and dignity and respect and kind of that person-centered approach. And also a reminder that these webinars will be posted on the Dementia Friendly YouTube channel in June, or maybe it's July 1st. And if you have more questions, you can contact Sharon Johnson, and her contact information is at the bottom of the slide. A few other resources for you. Prince George's County, Maryland's Area Agency on Aging phone numbers at the top of your screen. If you're not in Prince George's County or your loved one is not in Prince George's County, you can find your local Area Agency on Aging by visiting eldercare.gov. Also, there are good resources on the National Institutes of Health and National Institute on Aging websites. There are some really great e-newsletters you can sign up for caregivers or related to Alzheimer's or related to brain health. Really nice emails that come from them. And then Insight Memory Care Center, where I work, this is a resource to you as well, even if you're not in Northern Virginia, where we are. My contact information is here on the last slide, and so I do invite you, if you have questions after this session, feel free to get in touch with me. And I see we're already a little over our time, but thank you so much for being here this evening.